You made me look like a fool out there, Emily. You embarrassed me. That's what my husband, Jason, hissed under his breath as we walked out of his company's annual dinner. I still remember the way his jaw tightened, how he refused to hold my hand as we crossed the parking lot. The words cut through me sharper than the cold December air. And the worst part? I hadn't even done anything wrong. I laughed at a joke someone else made. That's it. One innocent laugh at his boss's story about a vacation disaster, and suddenly I was too loud, too much, and an embarrassment. Jason stormed ahead, his dress shoes slapping the pavement. I followed quietly, trying to understand what I'd done. But deep down, something inside me cracked that night, something that had been fragile for a long time. When we first met, Jason adored me for my energy. He used to say I could light up a room. I was spontaneous, funny, and a little clumsy, the kind of woman who danced in the kitchen and sang off-key in the car. He loved that version of me. Until he didn't. It started subtly. He'd say things like, maybe don't laugh so loud in front of my friends, or, you don't have to tell every story, babe. Then it turned into quiet corrections, a hand squeeze under the table, a glare when I spoke up, and later, comments like, you always have to make everything about you. I didn't notice how small I was becoming until there was barely anything left of me. At that dinner, when he said I embarrassed him, I smiled and apologized. I told him I didn't mean to. I told him I'd try to be quieter next time. He didn't say thank you. He didn't even look at me. He just muttered, you should know better. That night, I cried in the bathroom while he snored in bed. I looked at myself in the mirror, puffy eyes, smeared lipstick, and a woman I didn't recognize. I used to be confident. I used to believe I was fun to be around. But somewhere between trying to please him and trying not to upset him, I'd lost the spark that made me me. The next morning, I did what I always did. Made him breakfast, kissed his cheek, and acted like everything was fine. I told myself he was just stressed, that he didn't mean it. But that excuse was wearing thin. A few days later, I overheard him on the phone with his friend Mark. He was laughing, saying, man, you should have seen her. She was acting like she was hosting the party. I swear, sometimes I feel like I married a kid. I froze in the hallway, clutching the laundry basket. My face burned with humiliation. I wasn't just an embarrassment to him. I was a joke. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not in a dramatic movie-style way. No, it was quiet. A cold, steady kind of realization that if I didn't start standing up for myself, this man would destroy every piece of who I was. For the next few weeks, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just started watching. I noticed how Jason liked to play the perfect husband in public, the charming, supportive one. He'd compliment me in front of others, but roll his eyes at me the second we were alone. I noticed how he corrected me mid-sentence when I spoke about my job, as if I couldn't be trusted to get facts right. But what he didn't notice was that I'd started rebuilding myself quietly. I signed up for a fitness class, something I'd always wanted to do but he'd mocked before. You'll quit after a week, he used to say. But I didn't. I went every morning before work. I made friends there, confident, outspoken women who reminded me that I had a voice too. Then I enrolled in a short marketing course online. Jason laughed when he saw the confirmation email. Why? You already have a job. Because I want to grow, I said simply. He shrugged. You're wasting your time. But I didn't stop. 3 months later, I was offered a new position. A big step up with more pay and more recognition. My new team adored me. They said my ideas were creative and fresh. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Jason barely reacted. That's nice, he said flatly. But don't let it get to your head. It did get to my head, though, in the best way. I started dressing better, speaking with confidence, and even laughing the way I used to, freely, without fear of being too much. And that's when Jason began to change. He started getting jealous. If I went out with coworkers, he'd text nonstop. Who's there? When are you coming home? Why didn't you tell me? One evening, my company hosted a networking event at a downtown restaurant. I was one of the featured speakers, and honestly, I was nervous. When I stepped on stage and saw the crowd, I spotted Jason sitting in the back. I hadn't even invited him. After my talk, people came up to congratulate me. My boss said I was fantastic and that my energy was contagious. Jason stood awkwardly to the side, silent. When we got home, he finally spoke. "I didn't realize people actually listen to you like that," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I just smiled and went upstairs. A week later, his tune had changed completely. He started telling people, "My wife's been doing these amazing things at work, and you should meet her. She's incredible." The same man who once told me to tone it down now wanted everyone to see me. But I didn't do this for him. I did it for me. The final straw came one night when we were at another company event. This time, my company's. Someone asked how long we'd been married, and Jason, trying to be funny, said, "Too long. I can barely keep up with her these days." Everyone laughed, but I just looked at him. That old pain tried to rise again, but I stopped it. Later, when we were leaving, he reached for my hand and said softly, "You looked amazing tonight. I'm proud of you." I looked him in the eye and said, "You should be. I rebuilt the woman you broke." That night, I drove home alone. And for the first time, I didn't cry. Because I wasn't embarrassed anymore. He was. Now he begs to be seen with me. But I've learned something powerful. I don't need his validation anymore. I became the woman he never thought I could be. And that's the sweetest revenge of all. After that night, things between Jason and me didn't explode right away. They just shifted. It was like two people quietly switching sides on a chessboard without saying a word. He started noticing the things he'd always ignored before. My hair, my clothes, the way people greeted me with genuine warmth. He'd comment, "You've changed," like it was an accusation. And he was right, I had. But not in the way he meant. I wasn't trying to impress him anymore. I wasn't seeking approval for every outfit or every word that came out of my mouth. For years, I lived like a shadow, careful, apologetic, and small. Now I was standing in the light, and he didn't know how to handle it. One Saturday morning, I woke up early to go for a jog. It was part of my new routine, something that made me feel strong and grounded. When I came back, Jason was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I walked in, but I could feel the tension. "Where were you?" he asked flatly. "Running," I said, grabbing a bottle of water. He set his phone down. "You've been going out a lot lately. Classes, gym, work dinners. Are you trying to avoid me or something?" I almost laughed. The irony was too thick. For years, I begged him to spend time with me. Date nights, walks, even simple conversations. He was always too tired or too busy. Now that I had a life beyond him, suddenly it was a problem. "I'm just doing things that make me happy," I said calmly. His jaw tightened. "You mean things that make you feel important?" I looked him straight in the eye. Yes. Finally. He didn't have a comeback for that. He just stared at me, like he was realizing something he didn't want to admit. That evening, we went to a small gathering at one of his colleagues' houses. Usually, I dreaded those endless polite conversations, people pretending to like each other, and Jason acting like I was his accessory. But this time was different. When we walked in, people greeted me first. "Emily, I saw your article on the company's website. That was brilliant," one woman said. "You've got such a great presence," another added. Jason tried to smile through it, but I could see his pride wrestling with discomfort. He wasn't used to sharing the spotlight. At one point, his boss's wife pulled me aside. "You know," she whispered with a grin, "Jason's been bragging about you nonstop. Said you're the brains and the beauty in the family." I almost choked on my drink. "Jason? Bragging about me?" When we got home, he turned to me and said, "I didn't realize how much people admired you. I guess I never gave you enough credit." I nodded slowly. "No, you didn't." And I let the silence hang there. But things weren't magically fixed. Compliments couldn't erase the years he spent tearing me down. There were still moments when his old attitude peeked through. The subtle digs, the controlling tone. But now I didn't shrink away. One night, while we were getting ready for bed, he said, "You've really become independent lately. I feel like you don't need me anymore." I met his eyes in the mirror. "I don't." He looked stunned. "Wow, that's cold." "It's honest," I replied. "I still want a partner, Jason. But I won't keep playing small just so you can feel big." He didn't respond. Just climbed into bed and turned off the light. A few weeks later, my company held a charity gala. It was the biggest event of the year, and I was on the organizing team. Jason offered to come, and I said sure. I wanted him to see what I'd built for myself. The ballroom was glowing that night. Champagne glasses, soft jazz music, people dressed like something out of a magazine. I wore a navy blue gown that hugged my figure just right. For once, I felt radiant, not because of anyone else's gaze, but because I believed I was. As I mingled with donors and team members, Jason hovered behind me. He smiled for photos and laughed at the right moments, but he looked uneasy, like he was witnessing a version of me he couldn't control. Later, when I took the stage to thank our sponsors, the crowd applauded. I saw Jason clapping too, but his face was unreadable. Afterward, as we were leaving, a photographer stopped us. "Can I get a picture of you two together?" Jason smiled instantly. "Of course." I hesitated. I didn't want to fake it, but I stood beside him anyway. The flash went off, capturing us, me, standing tall, and him, holding on. The next morning, that photo was on my company's website. Our team at the annual gala, the caption read. Jason saw it and said, half joking, "I guess I'm officially the husband of the star now." I smiled softly. "Guess so." After that, he started behaving differently, showing up at my events, introducing me to people with pride, even posting pictures of us online with captions like, "So proud of my amazing wife." At first, it felt strange. The same man who once told me I was an embarrassment now wanted to parade me around. But I knew it wasn't about me changing. It was about him finally realizing what he lost when he broke my confidence. And part of me pitied him for it. Because now, no matter how much he tried to catch up, he was always one step behind. One night, while we were sitting on the porch, he said something that caught me off guard. Do you ever wish things could go back to how they were?" I sipped my tea before answering. "Which part? The one where I kept apologizing for existing, or the part where you pretended to love a version of me that wasn't real?" He looked down, defeated. "I didn't realize how bad I made you feel." "That's the thing," I said softly. "You didn't want to realize it." Silence. Just the sound of the crickets outside. Then he whispered, "I miss us." I looked at him and said, "You miss the version of me that made you comfortable. But she's gone." It wasn't cruel, it was the truth. Over time, I stopped trying to make our marriage something it wasn't. I didn't leave him right away, but I stopped chasing his approval. I stopped walking on eggshells. And the more I grew, the smaller his words became. They used to cut me, now they barely scratched the surface. Because I had finally learned something no one had ever told me, that love isn't supposed to make you disappear. By the end of that year, Jason was trying desperately to fix us. Date nights, gifts, apologies. He even told friends how lucky he was to have me. But I had already moved on emotionally. The woman he once called an embarrassment had become someone even he couldn't ignore. And deep down he knew. The world saw me now, and nothing he said could ever make me small again. Jason started following me around in subtle ways after that. He wasn't clingy in the obvious sense, but I could feel it, a quiet desperation in how he hovered near me at social events or watched me while I worked on my laptop in the living room. For years, I was the one looking for his attention, waiting for crumbs of affection. Now, the tables had turned. And instead of satisfaction, what I felt was clarity. I saw him for who he truly was, a man who wanted control more than love. It became more apparent when people around us began to notice the change in our dynamic. One evening, we attended a friend's birthday dinner at a fancy restaurant. Everyone was dressed up, laughing, passing plates of appetizers around. I felt genuinely happy, talking freely, cracking jokes, sharing stories from work. Then the waiter came by, and Jason jumped in before I could order. "She'll have the chicken, she doesn't like spicy food." The table went quiet for a moment. I looked at him, calm but firm. Actually, I'll have the shrimp pasta, please. I love spicy food. The waiter smiled and took the order. But Jason's face turned pale, as if I'd just committed some unspeakable sin. Later in the car, he snapped, "What was that? Why do you have to correct me in front of people?" "Because you were wrong," I said simply. "And I'm not letting you decide for me anymore." He gripped the steering wheel tightly. "You've changed, Emily. You used to be sweet. Now you're just difficult." I smiled softly. "No, Jason. I used to be quiet. There's a difference. It's strange how freedom feels at first. It's not loud or dramatic. It's steady, like breathing properly after years of holding your breath." I stopped checking his moods before speaking. I stopped apologizing for existing. And every time I chose myself, I felt stronger. But Jason didn't know what to do with this version of me. He'd bring up the past constantly. "Remember when we used to stay up talking for hours?" "Yes," I'd say. "Back when I was afraid of saying something you wouldn't like." He'd sigh and call me cold, distant. But I wasn't distant. I was healing. One night, he came home with flowers. "I miss the old US," he said again. I took the bouquet, smelled it, and gently placed it on the counter. "You miss the version of me who didn't challenge you." He looked at me helplessly. "I just want us to be happy again." "We can be," I said quietly. "But happiness can't come from pretending I'm smaller than I am." He nodded, eyes downcast. I could tell he didn't understand. Not really. But at least he was starting to realize he couldn't control me anymore. My friends noticed the change too. "Emily, you're glowing," my friend Brooke said over coffee one afternoon. "I remember when you used to ask us if you were too much. Now you just own it." I laughed. "Guess I finally stopped trying to fit into someone else's comfort zone." She nodded knowingly. "It's funny, isn't it? How men like Jason fall in love with confident women and then spend years trying to dim them." That line stuck with me. Because she was right. Jason didn't fall out of love with me because I changed. He fell out of love with me because I stopped needing his permission to shine. Around that time, I got an invitation to speak at a women's leadership event in Chicago. It was a huge deal for me. A paid opportunity, travel covered, and a chance to share my story about confidence and growth. When I told Jason, his reaction was lukewarm. "Chicago? Alone?" he asked. "For 3 days. "Yes," I said. "It's a work trip, not a vacation." He frowned. "You could just turn it down. You don't have to prove anything." I looked at him, realizing something profound. He wasn't afraid of me failing. He was afraid of me succeeding without him. "I'm not proving anything," I said softly. "I'm living." That trip changed everything. Standing on that stage, sharing my journey with a room full of women who nodded and teared up as I spoke, it was liberating. I wasn't just telling a story. I was reclaiming my voice piece by piece. When I got back, Jason was waiting at the airport with flowers again. But this time, he wasn't smug or defensive. He looked lost. He hugged me and whispered, "I watched the live stream. You were incredible." "Thank you," I said. "I mean it," he continued. "You were inspiring. I'm sorry I ever made you feel small." It was the first real apology he'd ever given me. And part of me wanted to believe it. But apologies are easy. Change isn't. Over the next few weeks, he tried harder, cooking dinner, asking about my day, introducing me proudly to people as my wife, the speaker. For a while, I let myself believe maybe we could find balance again. But then it happened. We were at another event, this time one of his. I was chatting with a group of people, and someone mentioned seeing my Chicago talk online. "Emily, that was amazing. You're such a natural speaker." Before I could thank them, Jason chuckled and said, "Yeah, she got lucky with that one. Must have been the lighting or something." Everyone laughed awkwardly. That same sharp pain I thought I'd buried came roaring back. The humiliation. The dismissal. The way he needed to cut me down just to feel tall again. I smiled politely through the rest of the night, but when we got home, I finally broke the silence. "Why do you do that?" I asked. "Do what?" "Undermine me. Every time I get a little bit of attention, you have to make a joke to take it away." He threw up his hands. "It was just a joke, Emily. Don't be so sensitive." I stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You're right. I'm not sensitive anymore. I'm aware. And that night, I slept on the couch, not because we argued, but because I didn't want to share the same space with someone who kept shrinking my world. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the blinds, I made a decision. I didn't announce it or dramatize it. I just knew, deep in my bones, that I was done. Done begging for respect. Done explaining my worth. Done being too much for a man who refused to grow beside me. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was release. And it was the most peaceful feeling I'd ever known. When Jason woke up and saw me packing a small suitcase, his face went pale. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to stay with Brooke for a while," I said calmly. "I need space." "Emily, come on. Don't do this. We can fix it." I looked at him one last time. "You had years to fix it. I spent years waiting for you to see me. Now that you finally do, it's too late." He tried to stop me at the door. "Please, don't leave. I'll change. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't walk out." I took a deep breath. "Jason, I don't want you to change for me. I want you to change for yourself." And with that, I walked out, not angry, not broken, just free. I drove away with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Not from fear, but from the strange, unfamiliar calm that comes when you finally choose yourself after years of choosing someone else. The world outside looked different that morning, brighter somehow. The same streets I'd driven 1,000 times before now felt like open roads instead of loops leading me back to the same pain. When I reached Brooke's house, she opened the door and just hugged me. No questions, no lectures, just warmth. "I was waiting for this day," she said quietly. I laughed through the tears. So was I. The first few nights away were harder than I expected. Not because I missed Jason. I didn't. I missed the routine. The familiarity of being needed, even if it came with control. The silence felt heavy, and there were moments I caught myself reaching for my phone, tempted to check if he'd texted. He did, of course. "Jason, I'm sorry." "Jason, can we talk?" "Jason, please come home. I can't sleep." At first, I didn't reply. I needed to feel the weight of my decision, to remind myself that silence wasn't cruelty, it was healing. After a few days, I sent one message. "I need time. Please respect that." He didn't argue after that, but the texts kept coming softer now. "I made dinner. I miss your laugh. The house feels empty." I read them all, but I didn't respond. Meanwhile, life moved on. Brooke encouraged me to go out with her friends, something I hadn't done in years. We went to art shows, small concerts, and late-night coffee runs. The first time I laughed freely in public again, it startled me. I realized I'd forgotten what my real laugh even sounded like. It was messy, loud, and unfiltered, and I loved it. One evening, I found myself sitting by Brooke's window, watching the rain, when my phone buzzed again. It was Jason, but this time it wasn't a text. It was a picture. It was one of us from our early years, back when everything was good. We were sitting on a picnic blanket, smiling at each other, oblivious to how fragile happiness can be. The caption read, "Jason, we used to be so in love. What happened to us?" I stared at it for a long time before typing back. You stopped loving me for who I was. I stopped pretending to be who you wanted." He didn't reply. Days turned into weeks. I started focusing on myself, really focusing. I threw myself into work, joined a yoga class, started journaling again. Every entry was like peeling off another layer of silence I'd worn for too long. People at work noticed the change. My manager even said, "You seem lighter these days, Emily. Happier." And it was true. I wasn't happy all the time, but I was honest. I didn't fake smiles anymore. I didn't hide behind "I'm fine." One evening, as I was packing up my laptop at work, my phone rang. It was Jason. For a second, I thought about ignoring it. But something inside me said, "You're strong enough to face this now." "Hey," I answered. He sounded hesitant. "Hi. I didn't think you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," I said plainly. There was silence. Then he said, "Can we meet? Just talk. No pressure." I took a deep breath. "Okay. One coffee. That's it." We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral ground. When I walked in, he stood up immediately. He looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes dull. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He smiled nervously. "You look good." "Thank you," I said, sitting down. He fidgeted with his cup before speaking. "I know I messed up. I said things I can't take back. I made you feel small, and I hate myself for that." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he continued, "keeping us respectable. But all I did was control you. I wanted you to fit into this picture of what a perfect wife looked like: quiet, graceful, supportive. And when you stopped fitting that picture, I panicked." His voice cracked a little. "You were never the problem, Emily. I was." It was strange hearing him say all the things I used to beg him to understand. "I appreciate that," I said softly. "But you can't unhurt someone with words." He nodded. "I know. I don't want to lose you." I met his gaze. "Jason, you already did." He looked shattered, but I didn't feel cruel. For the first time, I felt equal. No guilt, no fear. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But I can't go back to being that woman. I like who I am now. I like my voice, my independence, my peace." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Can't we start over?" I shook my head gently. "Starting over means pretending it never happened. I don't want to erase my pain just to make you comfortable again." He nodded slowly, realizing the truth he'd been avoiding. When I left the cafe, I didn't look back. It wasn't some movie moment with dramatic music. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of ending that feels right, even if it's sad. That night, I went back to Brooke's place and slept better than I had in months. In the morning, I checked my phone. One last message from Jason. "Jason, you were never an embarrassment, Emily." I was. I smiled faintly and deleted the text. Months passed. I moved into my own apartment, small but cozy, with sunlight pouring through the windows. I filled it with plants, candles, and laughter. I got used to eating dinner alone, taking walks in the evening, and enjoying silence without feeling lonely. My story from Chicago got published online, and it went semi-viral. People reached out to say it inspired them. Women, men, even teenagers. I was invited to speak again, this time on a podcast about self-worth and relationships. The host asked me, "If you could say one thing to the version of yourself who stayed quiet for all those years, what would it be?" I smiled and said, "You didn't lose your voice, you just forgot you had one. But it was always there, waiting for you to use it." A few months later, I bumped into Jason at a mutual friend's barbecue. It was awkward at first, small talk, polite smiles. He looked better, calmer. When I got up to leave, he walked me to my car. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said sincerely. "Thank you," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "I really did love you, you know. I just didn't know how to love you right." I smiled kindly. Maybe that's the point. Sometimes love isn't enough if it can't grow with you. He nodded, looking down. "I hope someone else gets it right." "I hope you do too," I said. And then I drove away, again at peace. Now, when people see me, confident, self-assured, smiling, they assume I've always been this way. But I know the truth. I built this woman from scratch. From the pieces of a broken one who once cried in her bathroom because her laughter was too loud. And maybe the sweetest part isn't that Jason now begs to be seen with me. It's that I don't need him or anyone to validate that I'm worth being seen. The next chapter of my life began quietly. There were no grand declarations, no cinematic scenes. Just me, finally living without second-guessing every breath I took. I started doing small things that once seemed insignificant but felt huge to me now. I'd go to the movies alone, order whatever I wanted without anyone correcting me, or laugh too loudly in cafes because something genuinely amused me. For the first time in years, I was comfortable in my own skin. I got promoted at work again, not because of luck, but because I had finally stopped dimming myself. My boss said during a team meeting, "Emily, your leadership these past months has been inspiring. You bring confidence without arrogance." And that was it. The moment that confirmed how far I'd come. I used to think being humble meant staying small. Now I understood that humility wasn't about shrinking. It was about knowing your worth without needing to prove it. Still, there were moments when I thought of Jason. Not in a longing way, more like how you think of a house you used to live in. The rooms might have been familiar once, but you'd never move back in after learning how cold it could get. Sometimes I'd catch a memory, his laugh, the way he used to wrap his arm around me in the early years, the late-night drives where we'd sing along to old songs. Those weren't lies. They were just moments that existed before the decay set in. Before his insecurities started poisoning everything we had. And while I didn't hate him, I couldn't forgive him enough to let him back into my world. One Saturday morning, as I was making breakfast, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was. Jason, hey. I heard about your latest talk. Congratulations. You're becoming kind of famous. I smiled at the screen. It wasn't a taunt. It sounded genuine, but tinged with something I recognized. Regret. Me, thanks, Jason. I'm happy. He replied after a pause. Jason, I'm glad. I mean that. You deserve it. That was it. No drama, no plea to meet. Just acknowledgement. And that simple exchange closed a chapter that had been dragging on too long. The funny thing about healing is that it sneaks up on you. One day you wake up and realize you didn't think about your pain for a whole week. Then a month. Then it becomes a story you tell, not a wound you touch. A few months later, my company sent me to New York for a leadership workshop. It was intense. Long hours, public speaking, networking, but I thrived on it. One evening after the sessions ended, a small group of us went out for dinner. Among them was a man named Ryan, smart, funny, and kind in that effortless way people are when they're genuinely confident. He wasn't like Jason. There was no pretense, no subtle competition, no need to control the conversation. He listened. When I spoke, he looked at me like what I was saying mattered. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to be seen, not tolerated. We talked about everything: work, life, bad coffee, and the little things that made us laugh. At one point, I mentioned my past, though I kept it brief. I was married once, I said. It didn't end well, but it taught me a lot. He didn't pry. He just nodded and said, sometimes the wrong story leads you to the right one. That stuck with me. I wasn't looking for love, not yet. I was just happy that for once, I could connect with someone without fear or performance. When I flew back home, Ryan and I stayed in touch. Texts at first, then phone calls, and eventually he visited my city for work. We had dinner again, and this time when he laughed at something I said, I didn't flinch or lower my voice. He noticed. You laugh like someone who used to be told not to, he said gently. I blinked, surprised. You could tell. He smiled. I can tell you stopped caring about what other people think, and that's kind of beautiful. That night, as I drove home, I realized something. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't even need to prove Jason wrong. I just needed to keep living in a way that made his opinion irrelevant. About a year after I left Jason, I got an invitation in the mail. It was from a mutual friend, a wedding invitation. And yes, Jason's name was on the guest list. For a moment, I debated not going. But then I thought, why not? I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was proud of who I'd become. So I went. When I arrived, he was already there, standing by the bar, looking a little older, a little more weathered. When our eyes met, he froze. Then he smiled, small and uncertain. I walked up, calm and composed. Hey, Jason. Emily, he said softly. You look incredible. Thank you, I said, returning the smile. We talked for a few minutes, polite, easy. He told me he'd started therapy, that he'd been working on himself. I told him about my speaking career, how I was mentoring young women now. He seemed genuinely proud, though I could see something in his eyes, the kind of quiet realization that hits when you understand you're the one who ruined something irreplaceable. When the music started, I excused myself and joined the crowd. I danced with friends, laughed, and lived fully in that moment. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jason watching, not with bitterness, but something close to. He used to tell me I embarrassed him when I danced. Now, he couldn't stop looking. Later, as I was leaving, he walked me to the door. You're really happy, aren't you? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, Jason. I am. He smiled sadly. Good. You deserve it. For a moment, there was silence. Then he said, I just wish I'd seen you the way everyone else does, before I lost you. I placed my hand on his arm gently. You couldn't see me because you didn't want to. You were too busy trying to make me smaller. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know. Then I walked away again, but this time, there was no pain, no longing, just gratitude that I had survived what once broke me. Back home that night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea and thought about how far I'd come. There was a time when his words defined me, when one comment about embarrassing him had shattered my confidence. Now my voice reached hundreds, maybe thousands, of people. Women who had been silenced, controlled, or made to feel too much. And every time I shared my story, I wasn't reliving my pain. I was rewriting it. Because I finally understood that power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from peace, from knowing that the person who once belittled you now admires the strength you built in spite of them. So yes, Jason begs to be seen with me now, not out of love, but out of recognition. Because the woman he tried to silence became someone the world listens to. And the sweetest part? I no longer need to be seen with anyone. I'm finally enough all on my own. Life has a funny way of rewarding you once you stop chasing validation. After that wedding, I came home feeling lighter, like a chapter had been quietly sealed without needing an ending speech. I didn't block Jason, I didn't delete his number, but I also didn't wait for any messages. The silence between us wasn't painful anymore. It was peaceful. In the months that followed, my speaking journey took off in ways I never imagined. The Chicago Talk had opened doors, and now, invitations were flooding in, corporate panels, women's leadership events, even universities asking me to speak to graduating students about confidence and self-worth. The first time I stepped on stage at a college auditorium and saw hundreds of young faces staring back at me, eager and hopeful, I almost cried. Because I used to be one of them, unsure, over-apologetic, trying to shrink myself into someone else's comfort zone. Now I was standing here, telling them not to. After that event, a student came up to me, nervous, maybe 19 or 20. She said, Miss Emily, I've been told I'm too emotional, too dramatic. People say I overreact. But you made me feel like maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I just care deeply. I smiled and told her, don't ever let anyone make you believe your depth is a flaw. It's what makes you real. She hugged me, and for a moment, I felt this deep sense of purpose, like all the pain I endured had been transformed into something meaningful. That's when I realized, sometimes you go through fire so you can help someone else out of the flames. A few months later, I got an email from a women's empowerment magazine asking if they could do a feature story on me, from embarrassed to empowered. The irony of that title made me laugh, but I said yes. They interviewed me about my career, my talks, and my journey through emotional abuse and rediscovery. They wanted photos too, so I did a professional shoot, bright, confident, unfiltered. When the issue came out, my photo was on the cover. It was surreal. I wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't rich or famous. But seeing myself on that glossy page felt like validation for every night I spent questioning my worth. I posted it on social media, and the response was overwhelming. Friends, colleagues, even strangers shared it with kind words. And then, among the hundreds of comments, I saw one from Jason. He wrote, "Proud of the woman you've become. You always had this in you. I just wasn't strong enough to see it." My hands froze on the keyboard. For a second, I considered replying. Maybe something polite or forgiving. But I didn't. Because that message wasn't for me anymore. It was for him. It was his way of finally facing the truth that I had already made peace with. So I let it sit there. No response, no reaction. Just silence. The most powerful answer I could ever give. One weekend, I was invited to speak at a charity gala. The same kind of event where, years ago, Jason once told me I embarrassed him. The irony wasn't lost on me. This time, I stood on the main stage, microphone in hand, telling a room full of donors and professionals about how women often silence themselves to keep others comfortable. I said, confidence doesn't mean being perfect. It means being unapologetically yourself, even when someone tells you that you're too much. The audience applauded, and as I stepped down, a man approached me. Older, kind-faced, one of the event sponsors. That was powerful, he said. My wife needed to hear that. Thank you. And then, a voice behind me made me freeze. Emily. I turned, and there he was. Jason. He looked the same but older. His hair was shorter, streaked with gray, and his eyes softer, not sharp or defensive like before. He smiled awkwardly. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm one of the contributors for this organization now. For a moment, the room blurred around us. Years ago, I would have felt anxious, overthinking every move, wondering if I looked too proud or too emotional. But now I just smiled. That's great, Jason. It's a good cause. He nodded slowly. I heard your speech. It was incredible. You've really changed lives. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. That's the goal. He hesitated, then said quietly, I'm sorry again for everything. I mean it this time. I believed him. Not because I needed to, but because his voice didn't have that defensive edge anymore. Still, I didn't say it's okay. Because it wasn't okay. It just wasn't mine to carry anymore. Instead, I said, I hope you've learned to be kinder to yourself too. He nodded. I'm trying. We smiled politely, exchanged a few more words, and then parted ways. That night, when I got home, I sat on my couch and thought about how far we'd both come, him learning, me healing. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about closure. It was about growth. Sometimes, the best ending is realizing you don't need one dramatic moment. Just two people walking separate paths that finally make sense. The months rolled on, and so did life. I kept speaking, mentoring, and even writing small articles, then essays, and eventually a book proposal. A publisher reached out, and before I knew it, I was signing a deal for my first book, Too Much, A Woman's Guide to Owning Her Voice. Writing it was emotional. I relived memories I thought I'd buried. The insults, the manipulation, the nights I cried quietly so Jason wouldn't hear. But I wrote it all down raw and honest. Not for revenge, but for release. When the book launched, it became an instant hit in its category. Messages poured in from readers who said, You told my story. One woman wrote, I left my husband last week after reading your book. I finally realized I wasn't crazy. I was just silenced. I cried when I read that. Because if even one woman found her courage through my pain, then every tear, every insult, every humiliation had been worth something. A year later, I was invited to speak at a national conference, the biggest event of my career so far. Thousands of people in the audience, cameras rolling, lights blinding. I took a deep breath, looked at the crowd, and began. My name is Emily Carter. A few years ago, someone told me I embarrassed him. That I should be quieter, gentler, smaller. I believed him for a while. But then I realized, people who are threatened by your light will always call it too bright. The audience went silent, not with disinterest, but with emotion. I smiled and continued. Today, I stand here as proof that your story doesn't end with someone else's opinion. It begins when you stop apologizing for who you are. Thunderous applause followed. Cameras flashed. I felt my heart race, not with fear, but with pride. As I walked off stage, one of the coordinators handed me a note someone had left backstage. It said, in neat handwriting, Thank you for teaching me that confidence doesn't mean arrogance. It means freedom. Jay. I knew who it was from. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I just whispered, You're welcome. Because maybe that's what real victory looks like. Not proving someone wrong, but helping them see right. The night after that conference, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I was overwhelmed. I sat by my hotel window, the city lights flickering below, thinking about how surreal everything had become. Years ago, I used to stand in that same kind of window, crying silently, wondering why my husband thought I wasn't enough. And now, I was in a hotel suite paid for by a conference that had just cheered my name. It felt poetic. I poured myself a cup of tea, pulled out my journal, and wrote. The girl who once apologized for laughing too loud now speaks to rooms full of strangers about why they should never apologize for being themselves. It wasn't pride. It was gratitude, a quiet kind of pride that comes from survival. A few days later, I flew home. My apartment felt warmer than usual, cozy, alive, like it held the echo of all my victories. There were flowers on my table, sent from my publisher, with a card that said, "To Emily for reminding the world that strength doesn't have to shout." I smiled. That was exactly how I felt, strong but calm. I was unpacking when my phone buzzed. It was Ryan, the man I'd met in New York months ago. We'd stayed in touch, always supportive, never intrusive. "Ryan, hey, I saw your speech online. You were incredible." "Me, thank you. It feels surreal sometimes." "Ryan, you earned every bit of it. Proud of you." Simple words. Genuine. No ego. No condescension. That kind of respect, quiet, effortless, was still something I was learning to receive without suspicion. But it felt right. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and I started talking more often, not just about work, but about life, our childhoods, our fears. He told me about his divorce years ago. "We were just kids pretending to be adults," he said. "It ended before we learned how to love properly." I told him about Jason, not in detail, but enough for him to understand the weight I once carried. He didn't pity me. He just listened, then said, "You know, it takes a lot of strength to stay soft after what you've been through." I smiled. "I'm trying to stay soft, but not small." He grinned. "That's the perfect kind of strength." Months passed. I published my book. I kept speaking. My days were full, but not rushed. My life finally felt balanced, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Then, one afternoon, I received an invitation that made me pause. It was from a popular TV network. They wanted me to appear on a talk show to discuss my book and my journey. I stared at the email for a full minute. The same woman who once hid behind her husband at parties was now being invited to speak on national television. I accepted, of course. When the day came, I was nervous but excited. The host introduced me as a voice for women rediscovering their confidence. The audience clapped, the lights hit my face, and for a split second, I remembered that night, the one where Jason said, "You embarrassed me in public." Now here I was in public again, but this time, everyone wanted to hear what I had to say. The interview went beautifully. The host asked about my past, my book, and what message I wanted to give to women who felt stuck in toxic relationships. I said, "You don't have to wait for someone else to validate your worth. The moment you stop asking for permission to be yourself, that's when real life begins." The audience applauded. The host smiled. And later that night, when I checked my phone, I saw hundreds of messages, from strangers, friends, and even old acquaintances. But one message stood out. It was from Jason. "I saw you on TV. You were amazing. I still can't believe how far you've come. You've become everything I used to be afraid you would. Unstoppable." I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "Me, thank you. I hope you're doing well." He replied once more, "I am now. Watching you succeed made me realize something. I never hated your light. I hated that I didn't have the courage to find my own." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because that message wasn't about me anymore. It was about him finally facing himself. And that, somehow, felt like the final closure I didn't even know I needed. A few months later, I hosted my own workshop series titled Becoming Unapologetic. It started small, 50 women in a rented community center room. But word spread fast. By the third event, we had hundreds attending, and soon it became a nationwide tour. Each session began with me asking the same question. How many of you have ever been told you're too much, too loud, too emotional, too confident, too ambitious? Almost every hand would rise. Then I'd smile and say, "Good," because that means you were never the problem. One evening after a session, as I was packing up, a woman about my age approached me. She looked nervous, clutching my book. She said softly, "Emily, your story saved my life. I was in a marriage that sounds exactly like yours. My husband made me believe I was embarrassing him, in front of his friends, his family, everyone. I thought it was my fault." Her voice cracked. "After I read your book, I left. And for the first time, I feel free." I hugged her. We both cried. It wasn't sadness. It was shared relief. A silent acknowledgement that pain can be recycled into purpose if you're brave enough to own it. That night, as I drove home, I thought about how far I'd come from that woman who once stood in a parking lot, apologizing for laughing too loudly. Jason had once said, "You embarrassed me in public." Now, the public was where I found my voice, and where I helped others find theirs. It was poetic justice, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance, like life had finally evened the scales. Ryan and I grew closer over time, but not because I needed him. Because I wanted to share my peace with someone who understood it. One night, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights, he asked, "Do you ever think about what you'd say to Jason if you saw him again?" I thought for a moment and said, "Nothing. I'd just smile. Because sometimes silence is the loudest, 'I told you so.'" He laughed softly and took my hand. "That's power, not anger, just peace." I nodded. Exactly. Real power is quiet. And it was. I'd gone from being the woman who cried in silence to the woman whose silence now spoke volumes. And though Jason might still tell people he was proud of me, deep down, I knew he was proud because I became everything he once tried to suppress. That's what growth looks like. It's not about proving someone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The day I realized that, I stopped calling it revenge. I started calling it redemption. By the time my Becoming Unapologetic tour reached its final city, my life had become something I once couldn't even imagine. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval anymore. Not my husband's, not society's, not even my own inner critic. I had peace. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself, because it's woven into your every breath. That morning, I woke up in my hotel room in Seattle, sunlight streaming through the curtains. My assistant, Claire, had left me a note on the nightstand. "You sold out. Again. 1,200 attendees tonight. Let's make it unforgettable." I smiled. I still got nervous before every talk, but it wasn't fear. It was gratitude disguised as adrenaline. That night, I stood behind the curtain, waiting to go on stage. The crowd buzzed on the other side, the soft hum of hundreds of women talking, laughing, waiting. I glanced at my reflection in the monitor. Same brown eyes, same smile, but a completely different woman. When the host introduced me, the applause was deafening. I walked on stage in a simple black dress. No need for glamour, just authenticity. "Good evening," I began, the mic warm in my hand. A few years ago, someone I loved told me I embarrassed him. And for a long time, I believed him. I shrank. I silenced myself, and I forgot who I was. But the truth is, I didn't embarrass him. My existence just reminded him of everything he wasn't brave enough to be. The crowd went quiet. Then I smiled. "So tonight, if you've ever been told you're too much, I want you to remember this: you're not too much. You're exactly enough for the right people." The applause that followed felt like thunder rolling through my chest. After the session ended, I spent over an hour meeting attendees, hugging them, listening to their stories, signing books. Every woman had her own version of mine. Some were still in the thick of it. Some were newly free. Some were just learning to breathe again. And every time I heard their words, "You helped me, you gave me courage, I finally left him," I felt a deep sense of purpose. I wasn't just healing myself anymore. I was helping others find their way out of the dark. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the edge of the stage in the empty hall. Claire came up beside me, smiling. "You realize you've created a movement, right?" I laughed softly. "I just told my story." "Yeah," she said. "But you told it in a way that made people believe they could rewrite theirs too." That hit me. Because that was the truth. I didn't set out to be a speaker, or an author, or a symbol. I just didn't want to feel invisible anymore. And in trying to be seen, I'd accidentally given others permission to do the same. The next morning, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. Unknown, "Hey, it's Jason." I blinked, surprised. We hadn't spoken in over a year since that last message about the TV interview. "Jason, I saw a clip from your Seattle talk. You said something that hit me. About how some people are afraid of others' light because it exposes their own shadows." That was me. I read it 3 times. There was no manipulation, no guilt tripping, just honesty. Then another message came through. "Jason, I wanted to thank you. Not for forgiving me, but for showing me what accountability looks like. I've been working on myself, and I'm finally happy, really happy for you. I sat there for a while, letting those words sink in. Then I typed back. I'm glad you found peace, Jason. We both deserved it, just not together. He replied with one last message. Jason, you're right. I used to want the world to see me with you because I thought it made me look good. Now, I just hope the world listens to you, because you make them better. For the first time, I felt closure. True closure. Not the kind that comes from revenge or validation, but the kind that comes from mutual growth. Months later, I was sitting in my apartment when I received an unexpected email. It was from a women's foundation that hosts an annual Voices of Change Awards gala. They wanted to honor me with the Empowerment Through Experience Award. I stared at the screen, heart racing. That phrase, empowerment through experience, it summed up everything my life had become. When the night came, I wore a simple silver gown and stood on the red-carpeted stage as the audience clapped. The host read my introduction. Emily Carter turned her pain into power and her silence into a megaphone for women everywhere. When I stepped up to the podium, I paused and looked out at the crowd. I used to think I had to be perfect to be worthy, I said softly. But the truth is, my imperfection was my invitation to learn, to rise, and to become. Applause filled the hall again. Cameras flashed. And somewhere deep inside, the woman who once cried in her bathroom whispered, "We made it." After the event, as I was leaving, I noticed someone standing by the exit. It was Jason. He wasn't there to interrupt or make a scene. He just nodded respectfully, almost shyly as I approached. "You look happy," he said quietly. "I am," I replied with a warm smile. He hesitated, then said, "I read your book. Twice. It hurt, but it helped. It made me see the kind of person I was, and the kind of person I still want to be." "That's good, Jason," I said sincerely. "You can still rewrite your story too." He nodded. "I already started. I'm in therapy now, and I volunteer at a local shelter that helps families rebuild after abuse. I guess I'm trying to make up for the man I used to be." My eyes softened. "That's more than most people ever do." He smiled sadly. "Maybe one day, I'll be the kind of man who doesn't just love women like you, but deserves them." I placed a hand gently on his arm. "I hope you do." And with that, we went our separate ways again. But this time, there was no pain, no bitterness. Just peace. Later that night, I stood on my balcony, the city glittering beneath me. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself. He said I embarrassed him in public. But in the end, the only thing I ever did was outgrow his comfort zone. And I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd evolved. A week later, Ryan joined me for dinner. He'd been following my journey, always cheering quietly from the sidelines. When I told him about the award, he raised a glass and said, "To becoming the woman you were always meant to be." I laughed. You know, it took me years to realize she was there all along, just waiting for permission. He smiled. "Good thing you stopped asking." We clinked glasses, the sound soft but powerful, like a promise that from here on, every chapter would be written in my own voice. That night, I closed my journal and wrote one final entry about Jason. He was the storm that shook me awake. And for that, I'm grateful. Because I built my peace from the pieces he left behind. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. The following year unfolded like a sunrise, slow, steady, and beautiful. I was still doing what I loved, writing, speaking, and mentoring. But something had shifted. I no longer felt like I was healing from my past. I was living beyond it. I had turned my pain into purpose, and now that purpose had roots, deep, unshakable ones. Everywhere I went, women came up to me with their stories. At airports, grocery stores, even coffee shops. One woman stopped me in line at Starbucks. "Are you Emily Carter?" she asked, her hands trembling. "I read your book. I left a man who made me feel small. You saved my life." I smiled and took her hands. "No," I said softly. "You saved your own. You just needed a reminder that you could." Her eyes filled with tears. "Still, thank you." Moments like that reminded me why I kept going. Every story, every tear, every message. It was proof that my pain hadn't been wasted. Ryan and I grew closer naturally. There was no whirlwind romance, no desperate attachment, just comfort, peaceful, steady affection. We'd spend our evenings cooking together, listening to music, talking about everything and nothing. He respected my independence, admired it even. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he asked, "Do you ever think about the version of you that existed before all this?" I paused, wiping my hands on a towel. Sometimes, but not with sadness anymore. She did the best she could with what she knew. He nodded thoughtfully. And now I live for the woman she was becoming. Ryan smiled. I love that. I smiled back. Me too. Later that month, my publisher invited me to speak at a global women's summit in London. It was the biggest opportunity I'd ever had. The keynote slot, prime time, main stage. When I stepped onto that stage, thousands of faces looked up at me. Lights, cameras, silence. I took a deep breath and began. A few years ago, I believed love meant shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. I thought being quiet meant being good, and being small meant being safe. But it doesn't. It means you've forgotten that you were born to take up space. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. I went on to tell my story, how love can wound when it's rooted in control, and how healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened but reclaiming who you were before it. I ended with a line that had become my truth. The people who once silenced you will one day watch you speak, and they won't recognize the sound of your voice. The crowd stood and clapped, some even crying. And as I stood there, smiling under the bright lights, I realized this wasn't just my redemption story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were too much. After the event, I returned to my hotel room exhausted but glowing. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, tags, and congratulations. Among them, there was one from an unfamiliar email address. From Jason H. Subject, thank you. Emily. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted to say I watched your speech. I cried through most of it. I finally understand what you meant when you said you didn't embarrass me. I embarrassed myself. I've spent the last year in therapy learning what control really is, and I see now that I loved you from fear, not respect. You deserved love that celebrated you, not one that caged you. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth, even when it exposed me. It saved more people than you'll ever know, including me. Jason. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen. There were no tears, no anger. Just a calm. I whispered to myself, we finally made peace. Then I closed the email and let it rest, just like our story. The following weeks were a blur of interviews and travel. But every night, no matter where I was, I kept a small ritual, journaling. One night I wrote, forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your life. It's about letting yourself step out of the cage they built for you. I'd finally forgiven Jason, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved freedom. And with that, the last bit of anger I didn't even know I still carried just melted away. Months later, Ryan asked me to go with him to a friend's wedding. It was the first wedding I'd attended since that one where I'd seen Jason years ago. When we arrived, people recognized me immediately. Oh my God, it's Emily Carter. Can I take a picture with you? I laughed, slightly embarrassed but grateful. Ryan watched me with a soft smile, his hand resting lightly on my back, not possessively, but proudly. When the music started, he leaned in and said, "Dance with me." I smiled. "You sure you can handle my embarrassing moves?" He laughed. "You can embarrass me all you want." And just like that, I laughed. Really laughed, spinning barefoot on the dance floor, unfiltered, unashamed. That's when it hit me. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Freedom, not fear. Joy, not judgment. Later that night, Ryan and I walked by the lake outside the venue. The moon reflected off the water, soft and golden. He stopped and looked at me. "You know," he said quietly, "you talk about strength like it's something you built. But I think it was always there. You just finally stopped letting someone convince you it wasn't." I smiled, heart swelling. "You're right. I think I just needed someone, maybe not even a person, maybe just a moment, to remind me." He nodded. "And now you remind others." I looked out at the water, the breeze brushing my hair. "Yeah. Maybe that's my purpose. He slipped his hand into mine. You found it. Months passed, and life flowed naturally. My second book was already in the works. This one focused on rebuilding after self-doubt. And sometimes when I walked past a mirror, I'd catch a glimpse of myself and smile, not because I looked perfect, but because I looked whole. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one Jason fell in love with, or the one he tried to fix. She was someone new, forged in fire but no longer burning. She laughed loudly, cried openly, spoke boldly, and loved deeply, without apology. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found a photo from the night everything started. The company dinner where Jason told me I'd embarrassed him. In the picture, I was smiling, oblivious to what would come. I stared at it for a while, then flipped it over and wrote on the back. She didn't embarrass anyone. She just refused to be invisible. Then I tucked it into my journal, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of growth. That night, I called my mother. She had seen every stage of my journey, the heartbreak, the silence, the rebirth. She said, "I'm so proud of you, Emily. You became the woman I always hoped you'd be." I smiled. It took a while. She laughed. All good things do. And she was right. Healing isn't fast. It's slow, gentle, and patient. But once you reach it, it's worth every bruise along the way. Before I went to bed, I wrote one last note in my journal. He said I embarrassed him in public. But now, the world sees me for who I really am, not because he finally changed his mind, but because I finally changed mine. And that night, I fell asleep smiling, not because everything was perfect, but because it was mine. A year later, I was standing on a stage in New York City, this time, not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker for an international women's empowerment summit. The audience filled an entire convention center. Banners with my face hung near the entrance, and my name glowed on the giant LED backdrop behind me. Emily Carter, from silence to strength. If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd end up here, I would have laughed, not because I didn't dream big, but because back then, I didn't think I deserved to. Now I knew better. When I walked onto the stage, applause filled the room. I took a deep breath, smiled, and began the speech that would close this chapter of my life. Once upon a time, I believed that love meant acceptance, even if it meant accepting less than I deserved. I thought being quiet made me graceful, that holding back made me kind, and that making someone else comfortable was the same as being loved. The crowd went still. I was wrong. I paused, scanning the audience. Love without respect is just control dressed up as care. And when someone calls you embarrassing for being yourself, what they really mean is they're embarrassed that they can't shine as brightly. A few people gasped softly, others nodded. I smiled gently. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't dim your light just because someone else forgot how to see. The applause was long, emotional, and genuine. For a moment, I closed my eyes and felt the sound wash over me, not as validation, but as completion. This was it. The moment that once felt impossible. After the event, I stepped off stage and hugged my team. Ryan was there too, come steady proud. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "You did it. You closed the loop." I smiled. "No," I said softly. "I opened a new one." We both laughed. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for the post-event dinner, I glanced at my reflection. I didn't see the woman who used to cry in the dark, wondering what she'd done wrong. I saw someone who had outgrown the need to be understood by the person who broke her. Every scar had turned into a story. Every wound had become a lesson. And that's when I realized I didn't just rebuild my confidence. I rebuilt me. At the dinner, the atmosphere was warm and full of life. Women from all over the world shared their stories, and I listened to every one of them. A woman from Spain told me, "Your words gave me the courage to start over." Another from Canada said, "I recorded your podcast and listened to it every morning before work." And one from India whispered, "I left my husband last month. You made me brave." I hugged each of them, because I knew their journeys weren't easy, and neither was mine. But that was the beauty of it. We all came from brokenness, yet here we were, whole, loud, visible. A few days later, I flew back home. When I landed, I had dozens of new messages. Most were congratulations, but one caught my eye. It was from an unfamiliar name, Alex Hayes. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but your story changed my sister's life." The message said, "My sister used to blame herself for everything. Her husband made her believe she was a burden. Last year, she attended one of your talks and walked out a different person. She's divorced now, thriving and free. I just wanted to say, thank you for giving her back to herself." I sat there, tears filling my eyes. Not sad tears, the kind that come when you finally understand why everything had to happen the way it did. That message wasn't about me. It was about impact, and how even pain, when shared truthfully, can become light for someone else. That evening, Ryan and I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, a ritual that had become our quiet celebration after every big milestone. He handed me a glass of wine and said, "You realize this is just the beginning, right?" I laughed softly. "That's what scares me and excites me." He smiled. "You've done the hardest part already." I looked at him curiously. "Which part?" "Believing you deserve to start over." I stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Yeah, that was the real battle." We clinked glasses, the city glowing beneath us. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I received an invitation from a prestigious publication, The New Yorker, to write an editorial piece titled, "The Woman He Called Embarrassing." They wanted me to tell my story in my own words, unfiltered, raw, and real. I hesitated at first. I'd moved on. I didn't want to reopen wounds. But then I realized, this wasn't about the past. It was about truth. About giving a voice to every woman who had ever been silenced by shame or manipulation. So I wrote it. Every word came naturally. It wasn't bitter, it was honest. I described the dinner where it all began, the slow unraveling of my identity, and the night I decided to stop apologizing for being too much. The article went viral. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. It was shared millions of times, and one line from it spread like wildfire online. I wasn't embarrassing. I was just too brave for someone who was too afraid. That line became my mantra. It showed up on posters, social media graphics, even tattoos. Women sent me pictures of it inked on their wrists, shoulders, ribs. It felt surreal, like my once broken voice was now echoing across the world. One night, as I scrolled through all those messages, I got another unexpected email. It was from Jason. "Emily, I read your article. I saw the line that everyone's sharing. I used to think I lost you because you stopped trying. But I understand now. I lost you because you finally started living. I'm remarried now. She's wonderful. She's strong like you, and I make sure she never feels small. I thought you should know. You helped me become a better man. Thank you, truly." For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at those words. Not because I missed him, I didn't. But because, for the first time, I realized how complete the circle had become. I didn't need his validation. But knowing that even he had found growth in my story meant it had come full circle. Pain turned to purpose. Resentment turned to release. I smiled, whispered, "Good," and deleted the message. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Now, years later, when I look back, I see this story clearly. Not as tragedy, not even as revenge, but as transformation. Jason said I embarrassed him in public. But the truth? That night was the beginning of everything. Because sometimes, the moment someone tries to silence you is the same moment life hands you your microphone. And once you learn to use it, you never give it back. Today, I speak to thousands, mentor hundreds, and love deeply, freely, without fear. And if you ever hear me laugh loudly in a crowd, that's not arrogance. That's victory. Because I am no longer the woman who apologizes for being seen. I am the woman who chooses to be.